Okay, now this data here for these messages, we want to be able to build our own backend to serve that data. So that's what we're gonna do next. Let me first tell you how to debug, how to understand where this data is coming from. With the dev tools, press F12 again, and you're gonna see the network tab in the dev tools. So you're gonna refresh the browser, and we're gonna see, make sure, let me see, there's some filters here. If I click all, that's everything that was, every request that was made. So this one, I know it's a XML HTTP request. That's typically what we use these days when we fetch some data from a backend API that serves JSON format. So I'm gonna choose XHR filter. So I can see here, it's fetching data, and I can click one of these requests to see more information about it. Here on the side, I want to look at the response, and you can see if I click raw, this is the raw thing, and that's where all this data is coming from. Now, this is a backend that somebody else wrote in JSON placeholder.typicode.com/post. But we want to build our own instead of using this one. So if I open a new tab and go to that, you're going to see all this data. And you click to the raw. It's just text with JSON format. So let's copy this data, actually. I'm going to copy a bunch of records, at least 10, okay? Let's copy at least 10 of them. You don't have to copy them all, but that's okay if you copy them all. I'm going to Control-C to copy. And then I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. And then under the server directory, I'll create a file. Let's call it post.json. And I'm going to paste that data here. Now let me choose spaces 2 here because I like 2 spaces. And I'm going to paste it again. Now make sure to close the array at the end if you don't have the closing square bracket. And this lingering comma should not be there because it's JSON format. Be careful the lingering comma in the last object before the square bracket's closing. And I think this is a properly formatted JSON. So I save this file. Now, today we're not going to use a database because that would be too much for us to do. So we can kind of simulate a database by just storing the data in a file like this, post.json. So if we want to manipulate this kind of file database, we just got to modify this file and overwrite it. Okay, so we got the data. Now we have to find a way to serve this data from our backend. Now, if you go to index.js for the server directory, we don't have any route yet. So route, you can think of a backend as a server that if you ask for some resource, it will give you back that resource. Now we must define all these pathways of getting a specific resource. And this is the pathway for the posts. So typically when you want to obtain information, you make a GET request and to some endpoint that I can say /post. Now, this GET is the method of the HTTP request, right? HTTP hypertext transfer protocol is what's used to transfer the data, from the server to the client. Now, this protocol has a method that's GET, that's typically used to get information. There are other methods like POST that's usually used to post information. That is, for example, you're creating a comment on a website. You need to give the comment content, right? What did you write? That's why you want to post that. But anyway, the second part is the endpoint URL. We're going to do /post. And this kind of way of writing the endpoint is called like RESTful. If you ever hear about that, you can look it up on your own. But basically, if you want to follow the REST way, there are many resources like posts, uh, like comments, products, orders, and so on. So each of them will have their own kind of endpoint. So we have slash products, we have slash orders, slash whatever resource it is. And this one of the resources just post, so we call it slash post. And notice it uses plural. Some people might use singular, so it's up to you. If you want to say slash post or slash post, I usually use plural. Okay, but you can give any name you want, okay, any path you want. But this is just a convention that's called REST. In any case, let's make this endpoint. So to make an endpoint before the app.listen, we're going to say app dot, and the function to call here is actually the name of the method, get. If it were post, you'd say post, but we're doing get. So dot get, and then call it as a function. Now we need to say, okay, get what? Slash post as a string. So that's the path. Now the second argument is a function with two arguments, rec and res. Now this is a callback function that when we ask the server for this, if we make a HTTP request to get slash posts, it will end up calling this function in the end. And you have access to the request object and to the response object. Okay, that's why we call it rec and res. Now, these variables, you can call it whatever you want. This is just like a convention that people use in a short, but choose whatever you think is appropriate. Okay, so the data is post.json. So first we need to read that. A very easy way to read a JSON file into JavaScript or Node.js is with require. So actually you can just go up here and say require, now dot slash post.json. Now the dot means current directory, and get slash is because we want to get something from the current directory, and the file post.json. Now, when we do this, we're going to load all this data from this file into an object in JavaScript. Now, because this object is an array, we can just call it const posts like this. So store this in a variable that I called posts. So I can conveniently use this here to send a response. Now, to send a response from the callback function here or handler, we have to use the res object. Remember, that's the parameter here. And then call the function dot send with whatever you want to send back to the client. In this case, I want to send back the content of this variable post, which is just an array of objects. Now I'm going to save that. And to test this out, remember, if you make a change to the code, you have to restart the server. So I go back to the backend here, and I'm going to kill the server, Control C, and then run it again with node space index.js. Now with that, I want to test this out to see if it's really working. So I go to the browser, and I'm going to open a new tab. So actually, when you type an address here in the browser, localhost colon 3001 slash posts, it always makes a GET request. So your browser itself is always making GET requests every time you type something in the address bar and press enter. If I do that, you're going to see the response. I'm going to click raw data because I think Firefox is formatting that. So this is the raw response. It's just text in the JSON format. That's pretty much the content of that file. Now, this is the raw thing. You can click pretty print on Firefox. I don't know if your browser has this function. So it kind of formats in an easy way. And I think it also does this live format to make it easier for us to visualize. But it's just text. Now let me see the headers here for this response header. So in HTTP, we have a request and we have a response. So the client, the browser, we make a request, and then we include some information in that request. And some of that information is stored in what we call headers. Headers is just pretty much a set of pair and values. right? We have the connection header with the value keep alive, content length header with the value 6066, and so on. So just metadata about this request, you know. So the response can also send headers the same way. So this one is the response headers, and the one in the bottom here is the request headers. Now I'm using Firefox and it shows this conveniently. So if you're using another browser, you might not have this. So how can you see that? Well, you can press the F12 to see the DevTools, click the network tab, and then refresh, and you should see the request down here. If I probably have to click all here now, the all filter, and I click this first one, and I can see here the response headers, and I can collapse and the request headers there. Now you can see the request, no payload, and then response, all of this. If I click raw, it's just text.